Kia ora, hi everyone. I'm here with Dr. Marc Cortez, a visiting lecturer here at Carey, who is this week teaching a course on being human, the significance of Christology for understanding humans. Marc, this is your particular area of expertise, theological anthropology. As you think about society and the church today, what are some of the particular flashpoints that you observe around this topic, and how does a Christian understanding of humanity help to resource how we might engage with some of those problems?
Yeah, it's a great question. I know certainly in America where I teach, the two topics that everyone is spending most of their time wrestling with right now, kind of the most challenging issues, are those that surround gender and sexuality and race and racism. I have begun teaching more intentionally about the issues around theology of disability as well, and how do we understand the humanity of persons who struggle with various kinds of disabilities. And those are complex issues altogether. I do think it's important that one of the unique things that Christians bring into the context and bringing these different kinds of conversations is what does it mean to think about what it means to be human as we see humanity revealed in who Jesus is? And that's a framework that we can add to the conversation that is distinctively Christian. It doesn't answer these issues as though we're going to have like simple resolutions to really complex problems, but it begins to get us thinking about what does it mean to be human, who we've been called to be, who we're created to be, where are we headed in Christ, in this kind of destiny that he has in mind for us, and how can that begin to shape how do I think of myself as a male in the relationships that I have, or how might somebody else think of themselves as female? How does being a Christian and understanding my identity in Christ relate to my understanding of myself as a white person, whatever we think that means, or other racial frameworks, and how might that shape my understanding of the disabilities that I do or don't have, or might not have. So that there's a sense in which I want to kind of ground all of these things in, if we're going to say that Jesus is God with us, but then also fully human, and the realization of what it means to be human. How does that shape these conversations?
Can you give us an example of a kind of way in which you might draw a line from this particular understanding of Jesus as human and one who is in some way, you know, a foretaste or a picture or some kind of prototype of where we're heading, and one of those issues, whether it be, you know, racism?
So one of the fun things that people are doing a lot in thinking theologically about race from this perspective is to really emphasize the fact that Jesus himself has a particular cultural, ethnic, racial identity, and really celebrating his Jewishness, his Galilean identity. What does it mean that God came to be with us in the midst of this very particularized cultural, ethnic context, and the ways in which that validates the fact that we are all particular humans, kind of shaped by those very same kinds of dynamics, that resonates with the picture that we get in Revelation, with the celebration of all tribes and tongues and nations not being overcome as though that gets lost in redemption, but celebrated, so that God redeems people rather than replacing them in all of this. And so we get to see a picture of that in the incarnate God-man himself.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's great. Of course, your students this week in class are getting all of this times 10, right? So you're from Wheaton College. This is one of the, I guess, leading evangelical colleges in the United States. That term evangelical is a highly problematic one these days. It's used in many different ways, and some people think it's beyond redemption, really. What do you understand by evangelical, and does the term have a future?
There are two different ways I can answer the question, right? So there's how do I understand evangelical as I would really like to be able to use the term, and there's how do I understand the word evangelical as it actually gets used, particularly in the States. So my least favorite thing, of course, is to see some poll that says evangelicals believe blah blah blah.
And then Donald Trump's supporters in the same
exactly.
sentence. That's right.
The way that I prefer, the term evangelical is just built off of the Greek term for the gospel, right? So to label yourself as evangelical is just to say that we are people of the gospel. Historically, as kind of most people tease this out, they want to root it in the revival renewal movements of the 18th century, going back to people like John Wesley and George Whitefield. And so that there is a sense in which evangelicals have their identity in the gospel, but also in this kind of historic renewal revival movement, with a sense that the church is to be constantly renewed and enlivened by what God is doing in the world.
Yep.
And so we get this kind of conversionistic emphasis.
And
So we're centered on the cross, we're big in the Bible.
Active in ministry, and
Yep. And so, and if I take it back to the 18th century, I get this emphasis on revival and these kind of classic definitions of what it means to be evangelical. In America, as we kind of fast forward into the 19th century, we also get a really strongly social activist posture of evangelicals. They're very engaged in the world and recognizing problems like women having the right to vote, or slavery, or alcohol abuse. And not that we necessarily navigated those things super well, but it clearly is a part of evangelical identity that we're not just, the renewal that we're about isn't just kind of narrowly focused on the church. It's the renewal of what God is doing in the world. And so if people will give me time to define the word in that sense, then I absolutely want to be evangelical.
Yes.
And that there is
right and left.
Absolutely. That this is a historic part of our identity, and it's actually a really good thing that we can get excited about. But I completely understand why lots of people are saying, "Hey, that's just not what the word means anymore." And I have friends in America who have abandoned the term, even though the way that I define it still applies to them. But I'm not using it anymore. And I still kind of want to fight for it because I think it's a good word, and I don't want to sacrifice its long history. And
is there a better term?
I don't know that there is.
Okay. Last question. Here at Carey, we feel called to train Christian leaders for ministry and mission in what is an increasingly fast-changing world. What are your thoughts around ministry training today, as you reflect on again society and on the church and on gospel ministry in the West today?
I mean, I don't think anybody would disagree that the greatest challenge is the church has always done ministry in changing cultural contexts. It's the shift from Christianity being maybe the norm, but certainly an accepted norm, to moving into a cultural context where the accepted part is no longer something that we can count on. And just what does that look like? How does a pastor how do we train pastors to function in a social setting where there's no longer a sense of comfort in being a Christian, right? We're now Christian in very uncomfortable times. So I was talking with the class earlier about the shift that has taken place in American talk about gender and sexuality issues when we moved that from a moral context to a civil rights issue. And that's
justice.
That's a hugely different location for that particular conversation. And lots of those kinds of dynamics are happening as we're moving from what people wanted to call a Christendom framework to a post-Christendom framework, or more of a secular context. And I do worry a little bit about whether or not our ministry training is keeping up with kind of those realities.
Great. Well, so no particular answers, but maybe some suggestions as to the way forward and things to be aware of in ministry training. That's great. Well, thank you. Thanks for your time, and thanks for coming to Carey and giving a week to teaching in our graduate program on theological anthropology.
It's been a lot of fun.
Cool. Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.